If we nominate a candidate who is simply Democrat light, what's the point? Why bother? We need to boldly proclaim our vision for America. We need to go boldly forth under the banner of liberty that clutches the Constitution in one hand and the Bill of Rights in the other.
A new face in the presidential race brings up new questions, and seeing as Rand Paul has long been considered something of an isolationist, one who covets liberty, and we are in a time of heightened security needs across the country, his announcement as a candidate today leads us to a serious question of what's more important to you, your liberty or your security? Second half of the arena begins. Pleasure to welcome back former LAPD Sergeant, law enforcement expert, and author of the book Black and Blue, The Creation of a Manifesto. Cheryl Dorsey joins us from LA, and joined by veteran national and international economist, business and political expert, sought-after conference speaker and commentator, Steve Beaman. Steve and Cheryl, thank you so much for being here.
Hi, Ed. Thank you for having me.
Great to talk to you again, Cheryl.
Ed and Cheryl, it's wonderful to be on with both of you.
Steve, good to see you again. Cheryl, I'm going to start with you. Ladies first, Rand Paul says he's running for president. Were you impressed?
Well, listen, I mean, you know, he's had 2 or 3 bites at the apple already, right? And so I'm not really convinced by a lot of what he says. I think he's well-intentioned in some arenas, but, I mean, we've heard this before, and so I guess the proof will be in the pudding down the road, right?
Well, actually, too, yet is his father actually had 3 bites at the apple earlier. His dad gave a shot, so this is Rand's shot to do it. So I'm just guessing it really wasn't that impressive to you, and he's not somebody that speaks to your needs for a president.
No, he does not.
Okay. Just out of curiosity's sake, what is it that he or someone else needs to push forward to you on a political side of things that would make you stand up and listen?
Well, you know, obviously security is important and freedoms are important, right? And so what I'm interested in personally is seeing a move in the direction of what are we going to do nationally about law enforcement related issues and shoring up things in terms of civil rights, and the economy is important. Jobs for people obviously is important. Wage is important. What people earn, right? We want to be able to work and take care of ourselves and not have to have 6 or 7 jobs to do that. And so that's what speaks to me, and that's what I want to hear about.
He talked about everyone having a job. He talked about some of the economy that he actually touched on briefly. Steve, what did you hear in this? Because what I heard was he was trying to get away from the isolationism that he is charged with also. He dropped a lot of Ronald Reagan in there, but did he really get out, in your opinion, and grab people?
I don't think he did as much as Ted Cruz, for example, did when he came out. But what's interesting and I think optimistic about his entering the race is it is going to change the debate. Rand Paul represents the libertarian side of things, which economically many Americans really do favor. And I think as he brings up more of a free economy, that will help change that debate to maybe move it a little bit out of the left into the center or even center right.
So let's touch a little bit on how I entered this segment where I talked about liberty and security. And Cheryl touched on this briefly. So Steve, here's the question for you. At this time of our lives, in what we have to face here internationally and also in our own country with homegrown terrorism, what's more important, liberty or security, if you got to pick one?
If I had to pick one, I'd pick liberty, because the old adage, if you want too much security, you get neither security nor liberty. But with that said, I'm not naive to the international and global threats facing our nation. I think most Americans just want a little more transparency than the NDAA has, for example, that they can understand what's being done to them in the interest of that security.
All right, and Cheryl, I throw this to you because he said, and Rand Paul said today, I will do whatever it takes to protect America from these haters of mankind. And you from law enforcement, what's more important? You got to choose one, liberty or security.
Well, if I had to choose one, I'm going to go with security, I guess, probably just based on my background. And so I think it's important that we're safe not only at home but abroad. And certainly we have instances now where we're seeing homegrown terrorists, people here on our shores who are wanting to work for ISIS and enemy combatants, if you will. And so I'm very much concerned about our security and our well-being here at home.
Is it tough to say, but as we move ahead and as we are hit on by so many groups around the world here, Cheryl, that sometimes we may have to give up some of our freedoms to be really secure?
Well, I think if we give up a little bit of freedom for the sake of security, I mean, for me personally, I'm good with that, because there's so much going on around the world, and so I think it's more important that we have intelligence to keep us safe, and then we have the methods and the means to physically keep us safe from harm here at home.
All right, now I got to take a break, Steve. I want to give you a chance to respond to this, but I don't want to do it here with just a couple of seconds to go. Cheryl Dorsey, Steve Beaman, please hang on. I know, Steve, I know full well that you have something to say on this, and I absolutely want to get it in here. Chuck Schumer has something to say that the president will not be happy to hear. And also, there happens to be this little issue of another magazine cover that has people screaming. The Arena continues. The Arena continues. Former LAPD Sergeant, author of the book Black and Blue, The Creation of a Manifesto, Cheryl Dorsey, and veteran national and international economist, Steve Beaman joins us. All right, Steve, we had to take a break there, and I know that Cheryl came back from her law enforcement side. She indicated that security is more important. I saw you had something to say.
Well, I respect greatly Cheryl's opinion, and I think none of us want to underestimate the threats that exist both domestically and internationally. But where we start to get problems in the liberty side is when the government extends its overreach into things like the civil forfeiture laws, where they're now going after small businesses, mom and pop grocery stores, and annexing their private bank accounts under the auspices of its anti-money laundering, anti-terrorism. And so we reverse the roles from being anti-terrorism to the government being the one terrorizing the citizens. And that's the kind of stuff that Americans are aware of and concerned about.
So, Cheryl, it's really a good point, though. How do we get to that stage? Because there has to be a separation there. And I understand what you're saying as well. I have said this for a long time, that with the enemies that we have out there, it would seem as if we're going to have to give up some freedoms here. But people don't want to hear that, Cheryl. How do we then keep this from becoming a totalitarian police state?
Well, obviously, it's a delicate balance that's going to have to be met. But you know, again, for me, I'm more concerned about my security, and I'm more concerned about my safety and the safety of others. And so I don't know that, you know, necessarily mom and pop banks being impacted by the government's reach are the things that, you know, most people are concerned about day to day. When you look at the crime and when you look at the Black Lives Matter movement and the things that are going on nationally in terms of people losing their lives, be it at the hands of criminals or organized groups, I think that I would be willing, and most others would, to give up a little bit of freedom to make sure that we're safe.
Let me ask you this then, Cheryl, and this comes down to freedom, I guess, and security for Americans here. Because the president just yesterday did an interview with NPR. He was talking about the Iranian deal, but he basically said at that point, he backed up a lot on what he said. At one time, he said that the Iranians would never get a nuclear weapon. But what he said yesterday was, well, probably after the 13th year, they'll be able to get one. Does that concern you when it comes down to the fact that we're not getting any straight answers here? And from a foreign policy standpoint, we don't seem to be as safe as we should be.
Well, you know, we can't trust the Iranians and what they say in terms of whether or not they'll keep their promises with this whole Iran negotiation that's going on. And so, again, there's going to be some give and take, and we're going to have to take them at their word to some extent until, you know, we can verify, right? Verify before we trust. And so while I'm concerned about that, certainly doing nothing won't solve the problem. And so we have to make some steps.
And on the other side of that, Steve, Democratic Senator Chuck Schumer is the one. He has come out and he is going against the White House on Iran. He is saying that, yes, we in Congress do need to look at this. You do need to give us the authority to look at this because we're involved in this as well. There's a lot going on here that should worry people about their security, Steve.
I think there's a huge amount going on. The Middle East has always been a powder keg, and I think we may have lit a fuse right now for this. Chuck Schumer is coming out, and he was a senator once known as having said nothing bad about Israel anytime. So it's not a surprise he came out like that today. I think there's a lot of concern that this situation in Iran will force a nuclear arms race in the Mideast, and Israel as a sovereign nation can't live with that. They're going to be a target of those attacks. They know it, and I don't think they'll wait around to find out if they're right.
Cheryl, I only got a few seconds left, but I did want to get a quick comment from you. The U.S. Special Operations, they're talking now that maybe women can't handle certain parts of being in the U.S. Special Ops. Even some women say maybe we are not made to handle it, and they're talking about maybe even having to lower standards for women in some roles. Does that insult you?
Well, you know, I don't think standards should be lowered in any occupation, and coming from a predominantly male type occupation as a police officer, I understand that there were certain things and limitations that women have. And so if we understand and recognize that, if you're able to meet that physical threshold, then you should be able to do that job. But I don't think that they should lower the standards for the mere sake of having women in those positions. And that would go for men as well, because I'm sure there's some men physically who can't meet the rigors of special ops. And so I think it should be across the board, evenly evaluated for both sexist.
Well put. There it is. You certainly have a line. If you can make it, you make it. Doesn't make a difference whether you're a man or a woman. Good point indeed. Hang on, everybody. We got to take a break, come back, do one more. When we do come back, it's rather interesting. You would think that we here in this country were already past the point where we would be upset about what is seemingly a really simple magazine cover. Not anymore. Not again. The Arena continues. The Arena continues. Former LAPD Sergeant, author of the book Black and Blue, The Creation of a Manifesto, Cheryl Dorsey, always a pleasure. And veteran national and international economist, always a pleasure as well. Steve Beaman joins us. Lady and gentlemen, we're going to lighten things up just a little bit here to get onto some of the other issues here. This actually caught me, and I can't believe that there are people still annoyed by this and unhappy about this. Steve, I'm going to throw this to you first here. Lexi Thompson is a star at the LPGA. She's 20 years old. She's very good at what she does. She's one hell of an athlete. Golf Digest has her on the cover right now where she does not have a proper shirt on. There's the picture. And there are people screaming that it does not show women in the right mood, that she is using her sex instead of her talent, that it is demeaning to women. Haven't we gotten past this yet?
Well, to your point, she was a national champion at age 12, so she is quite an athlete. But, all right, let's be honest. NASCAR has Danica Patrick. I mean, what more do we need?
Well, but
She's a
Danica Patrick doesn't race in a thong.
Well, she sure does promote herself in one.
Yes.
But, as we look at all this, I would hope we get behind it. There's a certain segment of the population that's going to be thrilled by this kind of videography or pictures. I think many of us look beyond it. Frankly, when I saw the cover, I didn't even notice it. I was looking at the Golf Digest for what it is. So I think we make too much and maybe sometimes make mountains out of molehills.
Cheryl, does that insult you when you see something like that? Does that make you think that women are just being used, perhaps just for their body?
Well, it doesn't bother me. I don't have great angst about it. I mean, she's a beautiful lady. But, I guess for some, we don't see Tiger Woods when he was at the height of his career posing provocatively. And so it could tend to make others question first, about her physical statue as opposed to talking about her prowess on the golf course. And so that's where we want to have our attention drawn, right?
I guess, but she also says, I have more clothes in that picture than a lot of girls that go to the beach. I have shoes on, I have shorts on, and I have a jacket covering me. Well, it's sort of a jacket, I guess, in this point. But shouldn't we be able at 2015, Cheryl, to just look past this and say, it's a talented young girl, they did the picture, let's move on. People complaining about this. Do we really need this at this stage of our existence?
Well, like I said, she's a pretty girl, and, I guess more power to her, because in a few years she won't be able to pose this way without the benefit of Photoshop, so have at it.
How dare you even think for 1 minute that might affect broadcasters? I'll always hold that against you. Just kidding. All right, 2 things, 2 minutes. Here we go. They're now talking about, in light of what happened in the French Alps, planes without pilots. They are now working on the technology to get it done. Cheryl, how would you feel about getting on board a plane knowing that it was only a machine and somebody on the ground flying your plane?
Yeah, that would be a problem for me. I understand that, pilots only spend a certain amount of time actually flying the plane anyway, but I'm just comforted by knowing there's a real live human being in there who can think and process information analytically, right? And so having no one at the helm is problematic for me.
Yeah, it's a little dicey for me. What do you, Steve, I know you're always on a plane going around the country. How'd you like to do that?
You know what? I'm actually all for it. If you look at
Really?
errors in flying or in automobiles, it's almost always human error that makes the problem happen. The reality is we're headed toward this at light speed. We're going to have robotically driven cars within, I don't know, the next time I buy a car probably. And I think we're not far away from these auto-flying planes. And I do think they'll be every bit as safe as a human-driven plane. I trust computers. I have no reason not to.
As long as they give us real flight attendants so that they can make sure to bring me the drink on time, I think everything is going to be fine. Even Cheryl knows that. Very briefly, here's something else. The TSA has made $674,000 last year just picking up spare change that people leave when they go through the metal detector. Steve, now I know where all your money went.
Well, I got to tell you, they're almost as bad as the toll booth operators around Chicago. But, the problem is, what do you do with the money? I mean, it gets left behind. People drop it off in those buckets. They don't pick it up. Somebody's got to take it.
It goes to them. The TSA, Cheryl, has got almost $750,000 in their pocket. You think they'd put it to good use?
Well, I'm all for them using it to enhance the security operations. Let's just hope that they do and And by the way, why don't we have somebody looking over their shoulder to make sure that that's where it goes?
Ah, see now, there's the law enforcement official right there speaking to make sure that everybody is nice and calm and gets it right. That's why we bring that in here. Cheryl Dorsey, it's always a pleasure to have you on the show. Every time we talk, it's something new and fun. Steve Beaman, actually very, very informative when you join us, my friend. It was good seeing you here in the studio last week. I thank you both for joining us. We'll talk to you both again soon.
Thank
My
you, Ed.
pleasure.
All right,
Bye,
folks,
Steve.
take care. Third and final Tuesday hour on MidPoint. Who here can tell me exactly what a libertarian is and what they stand for? We're going to hear that word an awful lot. We're going to hear it next, especially when we continue on MidPoint.